I'm Dan and welcome to Polar Currency and video number 69, What's a Treasury Note? I have to admit right off the bat that I did a lot of research and I still don't really understand why they were really issued. With that said, I'll be doing a shallow dive into the financial economics and politics of why the Treasury Notes became a unique part of the American paper currency story. Hopefully you can stay awake, but there's a lot of banknotes to share and even more history. But one thing is clear, they were not issued for a currency need that benefited the public. The Treasury Notes only benefited a single industry and more than likely a few corrupt politicians. Treasury Notes have a dual existence among collectors. Very few know what they really are, but almost all collectors are aware of them because of one denomination that was the most expensive banknote ever sold. Before we get going, I'd like to recognize the books and publications that aided me greatly in making this video. For time's sakes, I'm not going to read every title or author. I'm just going to show you the books and feel free to pause the video. All are worth adding to your library. Treasury notes certainly were a financial oddity and most likely led to one of the greatest recessions in American history. But they stand out because of their portraits and relatively short run even for 2 series. Out of the 8 notes, 7 of which honor well-known Civil War-era Union figures, there's an interesting currency factoid is that 7 out of the 8 notes for 1890-1891 Treasury notes are ranked in the 100 Greatest American Notes by Q. David Bowers and David M. Sundman book. After searching all my currency books and the entire Society of Paper Money Collectors article index, I couldn't find out why the Treasury Department decided to honor the Union men from the Civil War. These weren't the first Civil War era honored heroes. In 1886, General and 18th President Ulysses S. Grant was on the $5 silver certificate, and General Winfield Scott Hancock was on the $2 Series 1886 silver certificate. Both had died recently in 85 and 86, so that explains why they're on those banknotes. To show these Treasury notes, I'll be using 2 of my own notes, combined with souvenir cards printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, simply known as BEP cards. And I'll also use digital images. Let's get started with the first note. The $1 Treasury note bears the portrait of Edwin Stanton. My note is the 2nd Series 1891 FR 351 PMG graded 15. Stanton, a prominent attorney from Ohio, became the U.S. Attorney General under 15th President James Buchanan. Lincoln appointed him War Secretary when he took office in 1861. Stanton was revered for his efforts in winning the Civil War, but not without criticism. After Lincoln's assassination, he remained War Secretary under Andrew Johnson, who became the first president to face impeachment proceedings when he tried to fire Stanton. In 1869, Stanton was appointed to be an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, but died before taking office. Theatrical Historical Fiction Sidebar. Edwin Stanton was recently featured in an Apple TV production called Manhunt. It was about the investigation, pursuit, and capture of John Wilkes Booth that was led by Edwin Stanton at the time. He's played by English actor Tobias Menzies. Pretty decent series if you're into Civil War history. But what drove me crazy is that Tobias Menzies was a clean-shaven Stanton with no glasses. Stanton has the best beard on currency and always wore glasses. But the Manhunt production team opted to lose the look to present, and I quote, a more modern-looking Stanton, whatever the hell that means. Every picture or illustration of Stanton that you can Google shows him with a beard and glasses. For such an iconic historical person, they should have kept the beard and glasses. End of sidebar and back to the note. Here is a BEP card, Bureau of Engraving and Printing, with the 1890 series front that has the large brown seal. These cards beautifully reproduce the banknotes and all are complete with intaglio print. For the most part, the face of the 1890 and 1891 series, no matter what notes, are the same with minor design changes but 2 different treasury seals. This BEP card really shows the intricate level of detail in the border engraving. You can almost see the intaglio print. Like all the 1890 reverses, they feature an incredible amount of detail which was thought to thwart counterfeiting. The use of the acanthus leaves used primarily on the left and right sides is just stunning. Gouache printing is used to surround the alpha and numeric 1 as well as the background behind the large center 1. I just can't imagine dreaming this up, let alone engraving this on a piece of steel. Backwards! All of the reverses of the 1891 series banknotes were changed, adopting the new policy of less is more. It was thought that the previous series was too cluttered and made it more difficult to detect counterfeits. 7.1 million Series 1891 Treasury Notes were issued with an estimated survival rate of about 1,100. Over 57 million were issued for the Series 1891 with just over 4,500 surviving. The Series 1891 Treasury Note ranks number 83 in the greatest American currency notes. So what exactly is a Treasury Note? Here's the down and dirty. Treasury notes would not exist if it wasn't for unscrupulous silver mining interests and politicians that might have been a little corrupt. Imagine that. You shouldn't be shocked because it was the Gilded Age where the rich got obscenely rich and the poor, well, you get the point. But by the end of the 1880s, it was one of the most controversial political issues for the time period, and it was boiling over. So what was the debate about? Well, it was over the role of silver as money versus gold. The silver mining interests baited the hook and the politicians bit down hard. The result? The Act of July 14, 1890, known as the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. It was named for John Sherman, the Ohio Republican senator and former influential Secretary of the Treasury, who was serving as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee at the time. Ironically, Sherman was not an author of the act. Also worth noting that it was passed but without the support of Republican President Benjamin Harrison. The $2 Treasury Note depicts Union Major General James B. McPherson, also from Ohio. McPherson graduated from West Point in 1853, first in his class. He served the Union Army in the Western Theater under Generals Grant and Sherman. McPherson was the second highest-ranking Union officer to be killed in action during the war at the Battle of Atlanta. Ironically, the highest-ranking Union officer killed in action was Major General F. John Reynolds, who was killed at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 at a place called McPherson Ridge. James McPherson was an extremely competent and well-liked general, and when hearing of his death, his commanding officer, General William T. Sherman, wept. The BEP card shows why the 1890 series are more desirable than the 1891 series. Despite the very busy design, you have to appreciate the background behind the denomination rosettes to the lower center financial obligation. It's just amazing to hold what's basically an uncirculated note that's been reproduced by the BEP. Like all of the 1891 backs, they were updated with negative space design that provides an area for the silk threads in the paper to be seen. 4.9 million Series 1890 $2 Treasury Notes were issued with an estimated survival rate of just under 500. Over 19.9 million Series 1891 were issued with just over 1,300 surviving today. The Series 1890 $2 Treasury Note ranks number 15 in the greatest American currency notes. The lead up to Treasury Notes goes back to the discovery of the Comstock lode in the area around Virginia City, Nevada. It's estimated that this one area produced over $700 million of silver and gold from the late 1850s up until like the early 1920s. That's over $116 billion today. It couldn't last forever. By 1880, the mines were coming close to being tapped out, but silver was still flooding the market. And by the end of the decade, the price of silver had dropped to 70 cents an ounce, even though silver dollars were still 1 ounce of silver, basically. This resulted in Western mine owners and politicians, with the backing of Eastern business interests, wanting to keep that party going. That led to the passing of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, also known as the Treasury Note Act of 1890. That's the last Treasury Note that I own. Pictures and BEP cards from here on out. The $5 Treasury Note portrays Union Major General George H. Thomas. Thomas graduated from West Point in 1840, and at the outbreak of the Civil War, despite being from Virginia, remained loyal to the Union. This cost him his family, who never spoke to him again or attended his funeral in 1870. Thomas also served in the Mexican-American War under future President Zachary Taylor. He's most famous for his odd nickname, the Rock of Chickamauga. Serving in the Army of the Cumberland, Thomas rallied broken and scattered units together outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and prevented a Union defeat from becoming a hopeless rout, thereby gaining his nickname, the Rock. Well, not that rock, the Rock of Chickamauga. The reverse of the 1895 keeps the ornate design going. It amazes me that these were engraved and issued in less than 12 months. The front and back are completely new designs with new portraits, and the amount of time it took to engrave the backs of 7 notes for these ornate designs? And it takes 10 years today for the BEP just to change a portrait? Really? 7.2 million Series $1895 Treasury Notes were issued with an estimated survival rate of around 400. Over 17.1 million Series 1891 were issued with just over 800 surviving today. The Series $1895 Treasury Note ranks number 90 in the Greatest American Currency Notes book. The Sherman Silver Purchase Act required the federal government to buy 4.5 million ounces of silver bullion per month. And use the silver bullion to mint silver dollars. It didn't matter if the silver dollars were actually needed for commerce. And here's the kicker. Treasury notes could be converted into either silver or gold coins. I don't know, which one would you pick? Treasury notes were authorized from 1890 to 1893. The law also stated that the Treasury purchased that 4.5 million ounces of silver bullion a month and pay for it with, guess what? Treasury notes or coin notes, as they have become known because of the obligation on the front stating, will pay to the bearer X amount dollars in coin. These notes did gain widespread acceptance and were issued until 1893 when, only 3 years later, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act law was deemed a failure and repealed, ending the mandatory purchase of silver and issuance of treasury notes. So the party finally came to an end. However, notes were reissued and replaced until 1900. Thus, the coin notes helped to inflate the price of silver during the 1890s while allowing the mine owners and anyone else to convert their silver into gold via the coin notes. The ill-conceived act resulted in a massive drain of U.S. Treasury gold reserves, all because of greedy, corrupt mining interests and politicians and Eastern business leaders. President Grover Cleveland inherited this colossal mess along with the emerging panic of 1893 and economic depression at the same time he was taking the oath of office in March of 1893 for his second non-consecutive term. General of the Army Philip Sheridan is on the $10 Treasury note. Originally from New York, Sheridan graduated from West Point in 1853. It's worth noting that Sheridan was only a first lieutenant just prior to the start of the Civil War. Sheridan was originally stationed in the Western Theater of the war, where he was promoted to brigadier general in 1862. In 1864, Sheridan was transferred by now Lieutenant General Grant to the Eastern Theater to command the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac, and then later in 1864 he was promoted to command the Union Army of the Shenandoah. Sheridan's military career continued into Reconstruction and the Indian Wars when he was eventually promoted by Congress to the rank of General of the Army in 1883. At the time, the rank was the equivalent to the rank of today's 5-star general. The reverse of the ornate $10 1890 Treasury note is interesting in that it depicts a dollar sign, which is not that common for U.S. currency. 4.6 million Series 1890 $10 Treasury notes were issued with an estimated survival rate of about 400. Over 6 million 1891 $10 were issued with just under 500 surviving. The Series 1890 $10 is the only Treasury note that does not rank in the Greatest American Currency Notes. I guess Bowers and Sundman just weren't impressed with Sheridan. The Panic of 1893, pretty much caused by an oversupply of silver, also was aided by the collapse of the international commodity prices, especially wheat, which really hurt the farmers in our country. The low production of commodities resulted in the collapse of another railroad bubble. The Northern Pacific Railway, Union Pacific Railroad, and the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad all went into bankruptcy. And some 500 U.S. banks failed, as did innumerable companies. Unemployment peaked at 25% in Pennsylvania, 35% in New York, and 43% in Michigan. The depression that followed lasted into 1897 and was arguably the worst experienced by the country prior to the Great Depression. The $20 Treasury note has the portrait of John Marshall, a former Secretary of State under President John Adams, and the longest-serving U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice from 1801 to 1835. Marshall being on the 20 just doesn't quite fit the lineup with the rest of the Treasury note portraits. My best guess is that he was selected for his strong stance on the federal government and his belief that the U.S. Constitution granted strong central powers. The decision makers at the Treasury Department could have connected that to the states in rebellion during the Civil War not having the constitutional right to secede, but that's just pure speculation on my part. The reverse of the 1890-20 is a bit whimsical, especially when you compare it to the rest of the Treasury notes. It's got that curved text denomination. 1.3 million Series 1890 $20 Treasury notes were issued with an estimated survival rate of about 200. Just under 500,000 Series 1891s were issued, with around 175 surviving. The Series 1890 $20 Treasury note ranks number 61 in the greatest American currency notes. President Grover Cleveland correctly perceived the Sherman Silver Purchase Act to be the primary cause of the panic of 1893, and he succeeded in getting the silver purchase provision repealed in the fall of that year. However, the repeal of the reissue provision governing the Treasury notes that were backed by silver already purchased by the government had to await passage of the Gold Standard Act of 1900. That was the final nail in the coffin for the Act of 1890, but by then, the Treasury Department was already active in recalling the coin notes to stop the flood of silver converting into gold. The withdrawal of the Treasury notes from circulation created their scarcity today for paper money collectors. It's worth noting that Treasury notes' legal tender status remained in place, so that answers three things: how Treasury notes came to exist, why they were issued for such a short time, and why so few of them survived. That's how we got Treasury notes. The $50 U.S. Treasury note is the oddity of the entire series in that it was not issued as part of the original 1890 series, only Series 1891. The 50 is the second rarest note of the series, making them highly valuable. The note depicts William Seward, who was the Secretary of State during Lincoln's administration. Prior to the Civil War, Seward was governor and a U.S. senator from New York, leading up to Lincoln appointing him secretary in 1861. William Seward sidebar: not well known is that Seward was almost stabbed to death as part of the Lincoln assassination conspiracy. John Wilkes Booth's plan was to kill Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Seward all on the night of April 14, 1865. Booth, of course, murdered Lincoln, but his co-conspirators failed. George Atzerodt lost his nerve and abandoned his attempt to kill Johnson, while Seward was attacked by Lewis Powell, where he came very close to dying. Seward continued serving as Secretary of State for President Andrew Johnson. In 1867, Seward negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia for $7 million, or 2 cents an acre. The Louisiana Purchase cost 3 cents an acre. The purchase became known as Seward's Folly, as the territory was thought to be a frozen wasteland, but that is a myth. It was well known at the time that the purchase was a very good thing for the U.S., and the Senate approved 37-2 to complete the sale with Russia. End of sidebar. The 1890-50 reverse retains the white negative space design, this note even more so. 80,000 Series 1891 $50 Treasury notes were printed, but only 23,500 issued, with an estimated survival rate of 22. The highest price 50, graded 65 ppq by PCGS Currency, sold for $660,000 in 2018 by Stack's Bowers. The Series 1891 $20 Treasury note ranks number 56 in the greatest American currency notes. The portrait of Admiral David G. Farragut is on the face of the $100 coin note. Farragut was another Southerner from Tennessee that remained loyal to the Union during the Civil War. Farragut became the very first person to hold the rank of admiral in the United States Navy. In 1862, he was promoted to Rear Admiral and later promoted to Vice Admiral and then Admiral. Prior to the Civil War, the rank was known as Flag Officer and was a captain in the Navy. Farragut is credited with the famous quote, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," that he shouted out during the Battle of Mobile Bay in 1864. Admiral Farragut was a key military leader for the Union to winning the war with gaining control of the Mississippi River and cutting the Confederacy in two. The Series 1890 is most famous for its nickname because of the design on the reverse. It's called the watermelon note for the detailed gouache lathe work that makes up the body of the zeros that resembles the rind of the very large fruit. Once again, the level of detail is stunning, especially when you take a closer look at the legal obligation. I mean, that's a lot of tax packed into a small space. Just like the rest of the 1890 series, they changed to the open space design for the 100. 120,000 Series 1890 $100 Treasury Notes were issued with an estimated survival rate of 34. 80,000 Series 1891 were issued with only 12 surviving, obviously making them a very high dollar collector note. The last recorded auction I could find was from Stack's Bowers, where this PMG graded 63 EPQ sold for $372,000 in March of 2020. The Series 1890 $100 Treasury Note ranks number 18 in the greatest American currency notes. An interesting fact is that all Treasury notes have a star at the end of the serial number. This is not a replacement note, but a decorative suffix symbol that provides an end to the serial number. Many end suffix symbols were used prior to a star being used to signify a replacement note. Star replacement notes wouldn't make their appearance for another 20 years. The 500 denomination Treasury Note was never issued, but it's got an interesting story. Like the 50, there wasn't an 1890 series, but it's estimated that 16,000 Series 1891 500s were printed and then destroyed. This makes sense because by 1891, the Treasury Department was well aware of how disastrous the Silver Purchase Act of 1890 was on gold reserves, and they weren't about to issue another high-denomination Treasury note. Regardless, General of the Army William T. Sherman is portrayed on the $500 note, and it's worth a mention that he is the brother of the previously mentioned Ohio Senator John Sherman of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890. I think that just might serve as a little bit of irony, or maybe it's just a coincidence. William Tecumseh Sherman, an 1840 West Point graduate, again from Ohio, was commissioned as a colonel at the outbreak of the Civil War, again serving in the Western Theater under General Ulysses S. Grant. He was promoted to brigadier general in 1861 and major general in 1862. Sherman is most well known for his March to the Sea campaign through Georgia in late 1864 that would be the first turning point for total Union victory and was likely a main reason that Lincoln was reelected to a second term. After the war, Sherman remained in the military and eventually rose to the rank of full general, replacing Ulysses S. Grant as General-in-Chief of the Army from 1869 until he retired in 1883. I'm guessing here, but Sherman died in early 1891, which could have been part of the reason to create the Series 1891 $500 Treasury Note, given his Civil War hero prominence, at least for the North, because the South hated him. Although the $500 Treasury Note was authorized, plates were made, and they were printed, only two proof impressions of the note are known today. One of the proofs is a front and back pair, with the face graded 64 in a PCGS currency holder, and the back graded 66 PPQ, also an old PCGS currency holder. They sold together for $120,000 in 2018 by Stack's Bowers. There are a few collector notes regarding Treasury notes. They have the smallest number of signatures, seals, varieties, and Friedberg numbers of any other type of United States currency. Compared to legal tenders, gold certificates, silver certificates, you get the idea. Thanks to my friend Ontario 100 for his contribution for providing all the survival rate information dated in this video from Track and Price. And remember, these are only estimates for survival rates. For this Treasury note, we have to start with the back. The Series 1890 $1,000 Treasury note shares the famous nickname with the $100, the watermelon. The 1000 is, of course, the grand watermelon. Arguably one of the most famous banknotes known to collectors and, for that matter, non-collectors alike because of its rarity and market value. This high-res image really shows what is considered the holy grail of banknotes. Only 7 grand watermelon notes are known, Friedberg numbers 379A and 379B, and 4 are permanently held in government collections. It was the first banknote to sell at auction for $1 million in October 2005. The price tripled 11 years later in January of 2014 when Heritage Auctions sold a PCGS currency graded 40 for almost $3.3 million. $1,000 note bears the portrait of Major General George Meade, who is most well known as the commander of the Union Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg. After graduating from West Point in 1835, he served in the Mexican-American War. Meade is not one of the most well-known Union generals, but he served with distinction and for the most part was well regarded by his contemporary peers, despite not having a likable personality whatsoever. His nickname was the Old Snapping Turtle. The Series 1891 $1,000 Treasury notes, Friedberg numbers 379C and 379D, should be considered rarer because there are only 3 known. The last one listed as selling was a PCGS currency graded 45 PPQ, sold by Heritage Auctions in 2013 for $2.85 million. There were 28,000 Series 1890 $1,000 Treasury notes issued with a survival rate of 7. 32,000 Series 1891 were issued with only 2 known surviving. The Series 1890 $1,000 Treasury note ranks as number 1 in the greatest American currency notes and makes the cover of that book. And finally, there's the design difference between the two series. The U.S. Treasury seal was changed during the Series 1890 print run. With the exception of the $100, all the rest of the Series 1890 Treasury notes were issued with both the large brown and small red Treasury seals. The Series 1891 only had the smaller red scallop seal, along with the updated back. Another large-size banknote anomaly as to why they were issued from 1890 with 2 different seals. So that's the story of the 1890 and 1891 Treasury note or coin note. A series that was born out of political conflict and created under less than honorable intentions. But they make great banknotes to collect because denominations vary in price to affordable, especially the 1s and 2s, especially taking into those survival rates. They also go to mythically unattainable prices. I mean, really. I was speaking with my buddy Dean from Massapequa Gold and Silver, and he made the comment, would you rather spend $3 million on one note or $3 million on a bunch of great notes? Of course, I answered, both. A collector can dream, can't they? But it's a valid question. Well, thanks for hanging out for video number 69, What's a Treasury Note? As always, I appreciate your time. Please take the time to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, and feel free to leave a comment. We'll see you in a few weeks, and thanks for checking in.